Welcome, everyone. This is Tuesday Tips. We have a special edition in our Facebook group, Speaking Out on the Care of Your Aging Parents. And we are so happy and so blessed to have Crystal Flores with us. She is the founder and owner of The Grateful Death. And Crystal is an end-of-life doula. And I know we're going to talk about that a little bit today. November is National Hospice Month, and so we talk a lot about end-of-life cares, but I would be remiss in just mentioning, and talking about hospice, because an end-of-life doula can take things so much farther than that. So, Crystal, could you just tell us a little bit about you, how you got started, and what an end-of-life doula is?
Yeah, great. Thank you. I'm excited to be here, so thank you for inviting. So I came to this work in 2015. I wasn't really looking to do end of life work, but it kind of found me. I had a personal story, and since a lot of people that come to this work come from a personal story, I don't know anybody that goes to career day and says I'm gonna help people die, but that is essentially what happened organically, and I haven't looked back since. um, a doula, it's so hard to answer that question sometimes because we wear a lot of different hats, but to just get a simplified visual, we really bridge the gap between the medical necessity and the holistic comfort. And so hospice coming in is essential, and I could never do my job without hospice. So hospice is going to be the medical necessity component, which is the medications, the supplies, making changes to the meds, getting the bath aid in order, things like that. And then the end of life doula really bridges the gap with filling in all of the other pieces. So that could be bedside care, that could be organizing schedules. My role as an end of life doula really comes down to more care management, and I work with families a week to 6 weeks prior to their end of life, depending on the situation. And I work with the family more as a coach to normalize the process of what lies ahead and get things in order so that when the time comes, nobody's taken by surprise. And so really coaching everybody through what this is going to look like, what their role could and should be, which is, another valuable gift of having the doula is we absorb the tasking so that everybody can show up as their respective role. So sister can be sister, neighbor can be neighbor, friend can be friend, and people are coming in and being who they've always been to the person that's dying, rather than trying to cross roles into care and task doing. And that restores dignity to the person that's dying as well. So I really act as a coach a lot of times. And then the person that's dying, well, they're the greatest teacher. That is really who we learn from the most. If we can follow their guidance and what they how they communicate with us, even when they are nonverbal, then we will give the best care possible because they are the greatest teacher. So I don't know if that answers the question, but it sort of plants the seed of what an end of life doula can do. But there's a lot of different types of doulas out there that support end of life. Some do more of the paperwork side of it. Some do more of the bedside care of it. Some people do more of the coaching and organizing. So some people do all of it. Some people do grief. Some people add little bits and pieces. So it's a lot of options wrapped up into however your family needs you. Really, it's meeting them where they're at.
Now, I know you and I have talked before, and I just love what you do. And so, could you talk about, without, going without violating any privacy concerns, can you maybe share like a day in the life with a client or some of those extra special things? I know we've talked about things with legacy work, we've talked about other things. What could you just give us some ideas about those special touches that you do as an end of life doula?
Yeah, so I live in Washington, and Washington is a right to die state. And a lot of times, people, especially this time of year, I tend to get really busy because it's a time when people decide that it's time that they want to get things in order, whether it's putting their wishes down, whether it's holding, a meeting with family and letting them know what they do and don't want. I have sort of organically fallen into VSED support, which is voluntary suspend eating and drinking. And sometimes this is a client that doesn't qualify for using end-of-life medication. Sometimes it's a choice because it fits in with their faith or their family or whatever their wishes are to have more of a natural end of life. So a day in the life for me could be sitting down with somebody, having a consultation, understanding what it is that their wishes are, whether it's, hey, I'm going home next week and I'm stopping chemo. And I need my family to know that I don't want to fight anymore, but I'm having a hard time saying that to them because a lot of people in my family have expectations that I can power through this. So sometimes it's just helping to be an icebreaker. Well, let's do this and let's try this and let's try that. And it's a conversation. Sometimes it's, I've had this end of life. I've had this disease process that doesn't qualify me to be end of life per se as far as hospice is concerned right now, but I want to understand what my options are for an end of life that gives me autonomy. And so that really falls into VSED. And that means that's a lot of organizational things. That is not only getting paperwork and things in order, but holding very candid conversations with the family and their physicians to get them on board. In Washington, after you are at day 2, sometimes even day 1, sometimes day 3, depending on how much coverage there is, at that time, hospice will do an intake because the client is considered end of life after they've had no food or no fluids after 1 to 3 days. And so there are ways to navigate through being able to have body autonomy, having your end of life wishes put into place the way that you visualize them, and helping the family understand and support that vision. And it's not always that pretty. It sounds like we can just wrap it up and all right, this is how we do it, but as you know, family dynamics are messy. Mine is no exception. And sometimes families are not on board with what the person wants. And so a lot of times my job is to be a voice and an advocate when it's hard or impossible for the person to utilize their own advocacy.
And so what advice can you give if anyone's watching that um, is wanting to, take control of that process, and maybe they're approaching end of life, and they take that chemo patient for example, that just decides they just don't want to do it anymore, but their family expects them to fight. How do you negotiate? How do you navigate those waters and help that family?
Well, the first thing I do with every client is I have something called the Grateful Death Intention, and it's really like a value statement, but it dives a little bit deeper into the things that are meaningful and sacred to that person. It's stuff that we usually don't talk about on a day-to-day basis, which helps me understand what brings this person comfort prior to illness. And we sort of take um, that worksheet and we talk to the family about these are the things that are the most meaningful to me in my life. And it really circles back to quality versus quantity. And, I've had some really hard cases like this that are people younger than myself. And that makes it hard because there is the natural order of life, which is, when we're talking about aging parents, we're talking about, something that we knew was coming at some point. It's a little bit easier to digest. But when a young person is coming home and they don't want to fight the fight anymore, giving that person permission to say that or allow me to be a surrogate to say it for them really creates so much harmony within that person that's the first step into having the end of life experience they want, because people find it very, very, very challenging to face their loved ones and say, I don't want to fight anymore. I
Mhm.
don't want to do this anymore. And we love our people. We do. We love our humans. We love our family. We want them to be around. And sometimes those emotions get tangled up, which is why it's so nice to have a doula come in that understands what brings you comfort, understands what doesn't bring you comfort, and being able to be a voice for you that's not wrapped up in the emotional side of it. A lot of times it's simple things like it's hard for, the father of this patient to answer the door and say, we need a quiet day today. We can't have visitors. It's, well, who are you to say that? You aren't. So, family dynamics get messy where I can answer the door and say, hey, you know what, today is a really complicated day. Could you write a note? Can I relay a message? It's just not a good day to visit. So that's things you don't really think about that you really need until you're in the moment and have the need. And so my job is really to get in front of all of that. Here are some potential things that could happen in this particular family dynamic with this particular disease process and the client that is X amount years old that doesn't want all these things. And so I get to sort of tie that up and be the voice for it. And I'm not the bad guy because I'm not part of the family. And so
Mhm. Mhm.
that's helpful.
Exactly. It is. That's very helpful. I mean, we had a similar family situation that a lot of that dynamics came into play, and it was very challenging. And we as the loved ones, sometimes we get very selfish, and that's why we want them to fight because we don't want to let go. And so sometimes we just need to be reminded that it's about them, it's not about us, and
Yes.
that can be hard.
That's really, really hard too when it's a child and there are parents involved, right? That gets really complicated because it's like that's a really hard thing to wrap your head around. It's just not the natural order of life, right? And it's like, here's my child, adult or not, doesn't want to fight, wants permission to go and have it her way, but that's my child. I brought her into the world, or there's all these things, and I understand all sides of it. I can be a voice for Death with Dignity because it's the law and I support people through it. And I show up without any type of judgment. But when my mom wanted to use it, I was not on board with it. I did not support it. I was not an advocate for her. So it's very, very different. And I fully understand that. And that's really the beauty of having somebody come in that's not wrapped up on the emotional side of it. So,
And it's the same, for me coming from the nurse, the medical side, and you coming from, the support, the doula side, it's it's hard. I mean, when you talk about whether you're intentionally withholding food and drink, or you're at that stage in the dying process where you're starting to lose your swallowing muscles, and the family, they just want to force feed them, and sometimes, and I don't mean force feed in a bad way, but I mean, by nature we say, well, gosh, if you don't eat and drink, you're going to die. And it's just that vicious circle. And to try and explain to them whether you're trying to work with them, that they're intentionally doing this, or on the other side of things where their body is started that final journey, that final process where their body's dehydrating, they're losing their swallowing muscles. So that I just find that that's a tough one all together. Have you found any tips or tricks, or things to help a family understand that process?
yeah, that's a really good question. So there's two things that I deliver that are really hard to hear on, most of the time. The first one is your kids don't want your things. That one's a hard one to hear, but it really is the truth. And, we as a culture put a lot of emphasis on food and fluids, and rightfully so. We celebrate it, we honor it. It's a way that we show love to each other. So to get to a point in honoring somebody to not have that nourishment, we really, the way I approach it is the basic body function for having nourishment is because your body is thriving and it needs that fuel in order to survive. But when your organs are shutting down, you don't have a need for that. So then it becomes stressful for the client because they feel like this is something they should do, even if they don't want to. And so I don't always deliver it in that tone, but that's sort of the way I present it. It's in a way that right here, right now, we are all on the same page that we want to do everything we can to honor this person. And by honoring this person, we want to keep them out of stress mode. And a way we can do that is to not make them feel any sort of obligation. If they want a sip of water, fantastic. But if they don't, we need to honor that too. And that goes for every single part of the dying process. It's really difficult if somebody hasn't been with death intimately to be at the bedside and to see and hear and be part of the whole sensory experience of dying and not feel like they need to jump in to do something. That's really, really, really hard. But how I usually approach that is, this person knows exactly what they're doing. As long as hospice has managed the pain side of it, the moans, the groans, all the stuff that's uncomfortable to witness is part of their process. And if you honor that, it makes them comfortable. And so along with the food and the fluids and also, feeling like we need to jump in for every little moan and groan, it's really a reminder of let them lead, and let them teach you, and you will know exactly how to care for them in all the best ways. So when we talk so much about surrendering at end of life, right? Surrender, surrender, surrender. But it's been my experience that I am coaching people that surround the person that's dying what surrender is way more than the person that's dying. There's not a lot that I do with the person that's dying once their process starts. Working with them ahead of time and getting to know who they were prior to illness, that's where I spend the most time with them. The rest of the time is with the people that surround this person to help normalize it and make it so it's not scary, and also teach them what surrender is. We're surrendering to this person, and she's going to be our guide. She's going to show us how she wants to die. So honoring all the things, even if she doesn't want food or grandma's chili or whatever the case is. It's a hard one.
It is. It is. Crystal, where do you normally provide your services? Is it normally in the home, or do you go into facilities, or where do you normally provide your support?
So I have gone into facilities for consultations and meetings and and presentations. I've been in hospitals. I've been in assisted living facilities. I've been in independent living facilities, but ultimately where I do my best work is when the client can be in a home setting. And sometimes that means, I've had several times when clients have moved out of the facility they're living in and get an Airbnb, and it's an opportunity for families to come together as well and be in all the same spot, but also have spaces of their own, and for the person to be able to exercise their personal choices, which you really can't do inside a facility. As we know, there's a lot of red tape, and I did my very, very first VSED client in a facility, and it was at the very beginning of COVID, and there were so many challenges within that because, well, I don't even need to go there. But from that point on, I no longer took people that wanted to do VSED that were in some sort of structured facility. I'll meet with them, I'll consult with them, and then I'll recommend that they either move in with a family member, which is typically an adult child, or get an Airbnb where you can have the privacy and the freedom to do the things you want to do your way, because it is by law that people have to come in and offer food and drinks and, do the things that
Mhm,
are
mhm,
done in a facility, where when you're
mhm,
in your home setting, you get to decide
mhm.
what you want and what you don't want. And so,
I've got a crazy question.
yeah.
And number one, I think that whole Airbnb thing is an awesome idea. But number two, when they book that, do they say why have they ever gotten any weird feedback when they say why they're going to use the
I
home?
usually
Or
book it for them.
okay.
And I'm always transparent. I've
Mhm,
yet to have anybody turn me down. I have changed my mind on one just because it wasn't as accessible as I thought it was.
mhm,
Because
mhm,
obviously we're talking about, it's not going to be for a couple nights, and we are
mhm,
going to need
mhm,
to move furniture around. And so
mhm. Mhm.
I had a client that wanted to be in downtown Seattle in their Airbnb. Well, that's not convenient. You have very cramped spaces. You don't have parking. It wasn't easy to get a hospital bed in. So there are things that I look for, but when I make the calls, I let them know that this person isn't, I don't give them all the crazy details,
Mhm. Mhm.
but I do say this person is at the end of their life. They would like to be able to be with their family in sort of a communal space. And do you have a problem with that? And we typically book it for 2 to 4 weeks,
Mhm.
whether we need all that time or not. And nobody's
Mhm.
turned me down yet. So,
That's awesome. I think that's an amazing idea. So I
yeah,
think that's a fantastic idea. So Crystal, I know you're out in the Seattle area. Do you provide any services virtually? And
I do.
how does that work?
So people can contact me through my website, and sometimes it's consulting and coaching virtually. So sometimes people want to support their loved one through the entire experience, but they don't know how. And
Mhm.
so I can coach and work with them through the process, walking them through what this is going to look like, working with them and sort of being the surrogate with them. So they're the doula and I'm coaching them on how
Mhm.
to do that. So sometimes it's like that. Sometimes it's, I want to know what I need to do to get my affairs in order.
Mhm.
Things have changed in Washington, and we no longer have. We will take out of state patients that want to exercise the law if they live in a state that doesn't offer what we do. And
That is
so
very good to know. Mhm.
yep. And so that is really helpful. And there's no timeline restrictions on that too. They still have to qualify. They still have to have the physicians that are willing to say, all of the things still apply,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
they don't have to come here and establish themselves for X amount of time in order to do that. So answering questions, coaching, and sometimes it's honestly um, doulas that have either gone through training or not and want to know how to get started. My whole thing in this work is we are not going to change the narrative and normalize what this is until we have as many feet on the ground as possible. And so
Mhm.
I am more than happy to share any and everything that I know. That's how we're going to make a shift and normalize what this is so that people aren't like, end of life doula, what? It's
And
really like the birthing doula movement, right? It's like that
mhm.
was really
Mhm.
weird and awkward for a while. And then it's like,
Mhm.
oh, I know what a doula is because I had one when my
Mhm.
son was born. Well, it's the same thing. It's just the other
Mhm.
end of the cycle.
Mhm. And that's so important. And that birthing a baby, that's an exciting. It's a new experience, but we still haven't gotten to the point where speaking about dying, that's still taboo. And I know
Yeah.
you're working very, very hard to change that narrative. And I mean, we need to change that narrative because we're all going to pass away. We are all going to leave here.
Yeah.
And we can't keep kind of sweeping it under the rug and being hush hush about it because, people have a right to have that experience the way they want. They want to be able to design that experience and have the experience they want, and there need to be people that can support that. And so we have to open up the dialogue. I mean, we have to start speaking out loud. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here because I know that's a big part of your philosophy is just getting the word out and just taking that stigma away. So Crystal, in I'm sorry, go ahead. What were you gonna
No, I
say?
was just going to say, just for an example, so I also do companion care, and I have a husband and wife that I've been working with doing companion care and care management for about a year now. And they are like most families were also like my family that just didn't talk about end of life. And so we finally had our first family meeting last night. And, that was the icebreaker. If we talk about sex right now, none of us are going to get pregnant. It's not going to
Mhm.
happen. So if we
Mhm.
talk about death right now, no one's going to keel over and die right now. I promise. It's not a dirty word. And that was a great segue into, okay, let's lighten the mood a little bit because the reality
Mhm.
is we can talk about these parents that are aging and probably closer to end of life, but the reality is we're all dying right now.
Mhm.
Some of us are just doing it quicker.
Mm-hmm.
And if the natural order of life is going to happen in that way, they're probably going to go first, but it's going to happen to all of us. So we might as well stop shaming it and start
Mm-hmm.
celebrating it. And that
Mm-hmm.
is, I came into this work because I'm a product of that. I got thrown into a situation and was like swimming upstream, feeling like have no idea what to do. Well, that's the backbone of what I do. If I can help one family not feel lost in the way that I was, then I've done my job.
Absolutely. So, Crystal, how would people, and I will, this is being recorded and in our private Facebook group, as well as when we put it up on the YouTube channel, we will have all of Crystal's information attached to that. But just in being able to wrap this up, Crystal, how would someone get a hold of you to use your services?
Yeah, so I would say go to my website, which is thegratefuldeath.org. And yes, when you type in the Grateful Death, you're going to get all of the things for the Grateful Dead. I'm no affiliation of the band. So don't let that detour you. I promise it's thegratefuldeath.org. You can also email me at crystal@thegratefuldeath.org or send me a text message or smoke signals. I'm always available. So
I appreciate that. And so, Crystal, last, I just wanted to give you an opportunity. Was there something that we didn't talk about, or something that you feel passionate about the end of life process, or what you do, that you'd like to share before we close?
oh boy. You're gonna ask me that at the end? I got so many. I don't know. I don't even know I don't even know how to answer that. I mean, I guess I'm just gonna go with what is really the dialogue. It's really, have the uncomfortable conversations. Get comfortable with the uncomfortable, because chances are once you open up this conversation, the people in your life are going to feel relief. People like permission to talk about this stuff. We just don't allow the space to do it. And so it always seems more daunting than it really is. And once it happens, I have not facilitated a family meeting conversation with anyone that says, dang, I wish we wouldn't have done that. Everybody walks away saying, oh, that was hard and I'm so glad we did it. So have the conversations, get uncomfortable. It's temporary, and that is so valuable. It's so valuable to the people that love you.
Well, Crystal, I just want to thank you so much. I think you've shared a lot of information to help dispel some of those, misconceptions, and to be able to open up the conversation about the death and dying process. I so admire you and so admire what you do, because
Thank
that is such a wonderful support. And at that end of life, it's such an intimate, period of time for that person and their family, and for you to be able to come along and provide support. I just truly love what you do. So I thank you so much for sharing some information with us today. And
Well,
so,
I could not do the work I do without you. So I am really grateful that you give people like me the opportunity to do this, because we got boots on the ground, but if nobody knows about it, you
mhm,
know, we're very limited. So thank you for what you do.
you're very welcome. All right, well, that's going to wrap it up for another Tuesday Tips, and we will have the recording up soon. And again, thank you so much, Crystal, and we will have Crystal's information available for everyone if you want to reach out to her and connect. So thank you so much, Crystal.
Thank
All right, take
you.
care of you.
Thanks.